Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/spookshow. Then go over to morbidlybeautiful.com as we are now part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcasting Network. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the All-American Spook Show. I'm Josh. I'm joined here with Professor Smoak.
What's up?
Donnie and Will are both on assignment. They got some stuff going on, so they were not able to make it this week, and that's a shame because it's time for our latest Cannon Fodder, which these are always a blast. And I don't think there's any less of a blast here this week with Cyborg from 1989. Now, we all nominated a movie. We put it on our old famous wheel, and we spun it, and this is what it landed on. But I nominated this one, so I'm a proud papa today that we're getting around to Cyborg. But it is kind of bittersweet in the sense that, like, this was pretty much it for classic Cannon films. Not it for us. I mean, we got 1,000 movies to keep watching here on Cannon Fodder as the months and years go by. But as far as Cannon itself, this was pretty much the death of the Cannon that you knew and loved back then, because this was the last one that they released as a Golan-Globus production there in 1989. So we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go on. And, of course, we've got our usual Cannon Chronicles tidbit from Cannon Film Guide Volume 1 and Volume 2 author Austin Trunick. That will be coming up here in just a few minutes. So I'm sure he'll have some details on that, and we've got some other stuff that we dug up. So it ought to be an interesting episode. I'm looking forward to it. This is a cool one. But before we dive in, we will put it out on Front Street that we are a spoiler-filled podcast. So if you have not seen Cyborg and you want to watch it, you probably want to go ahead and hit pause, go check it out, and come back and listen to us talk about it and listen to Austin's Cannon Chronicles bit and everything. You don't want to miss any of that. So we encourage you to go check it out and then come back and listen to us, because we are going to spoil this movie here on the podcast. We also want to remind you to go over to aaspookshow.com. That's the center of the Spook Show universe. From there, you can go to our YouTube page where we have Spook Show Rewind, Video Vortex, Hammer Horror in Order, and, of course, Grindhouse Gutter. All those come out, pretty much weekly, every month. There might be a week or so there that we don't put out any of that stuff. But for the most part, it comes out every week, each month. So lots of cool little series there. And, of course, we also put podcast episodes all over there. So if you don't listen to your podcast in your traditional manners, you can also listen to them over on our YouTube channel. And you can get there through aaspookshow.com, where you can also get to patreon.com/aaspookshow, our Patreon page, where every month over there, we have many levels. And you get our video minisodes every month that features the Library of the Professor. And you also get the most important thing, Crapsterpiece Theater, where good God, you landed a turd on us this month with Troll 2.
Yeah.
Yet another turd. But I think this will be a more fun turd than we had last month with Cats, right?
Definitely, yes. Yeah, this one, I didn't choose Cats. Donnie, I believe it was, chose Cats and was the lucky one not to have to do the episode. Mm-hmm. This time around, I chose Troll 2, but I need to figure out the choosing method on what might win that I don't want to see. Yeah. Because Troll 2, I chose, it won, but I kind of want to see it because it's been a while and it's a fun crap movie, So, yeah.
And I will also add that it overwhelmingly won this poll. Like, I don't have the final numbers in front of me, but it took, it was double, almost nearly double the next movie that was on the list. So as far as polls are concerned, you picked a big winner, which is ironic because I'm pretty sure that we've nominated Troll 2 before on one of these polls.
Yeah, I think I put it on there before one time, but I don't remember what it was up against and what won that time. But.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. But I know it's been nominated before by you or someone else, and it did not win. But this time, boy, it took the poll by storm. So, that will be coming out later this week. It comes out March 24th, Friday, but you only get to listen to it if you're a patron over on patreon.com/aaspookshow. So we encourage you to do that. Lots of cool stuff over there. And I guess that's pretty much it. So we'll go ahead and toss to the trailer before we get into Austin's Cannon Chronicles.
Welcome to the world of the not-too-distant future. Get going! Go! A brutal gang is reshaping the world into their own vision of hell. And only one man can stop them. Jean-Claude Van Damme is leading the battle between good and evil.
Take him out.
As it's never been fought before. He's on a desperate mission to rescue a cyborg who holds the secret for saving the world.
Why did you help me?
I don't want to see you die.
From the dust of destruction rises the warrior of a new age.
Say goodbye, my friend.
Jean-Claude Van Damme has become the first hero of the 21st century. Cyborg.
All right, so there you go. That's the trailer for Cyborg. So now I guess it's time. We always give Austin Trunick, author of the Cannon Film Guide, Volume 1 and Volume 2, the floor every time we do a Cannon Fodder, or if we randomly do one like we did with Hospital Massacre, where it wasn't a Cannon Fodder, but since it was a Cannon movie, we treated it as such. So every time we pretty much do a Cannon movie, since we started doing this back with not No Holds Barred. That's not a Cannon movie, although you could see that being a Cannon movie. I think we started with Over the Top. I think is where we all started it. Although we went back and retroactively added in New Year's Evil and 10 to Midnight. Those are the ones. So those are basically the only episodes you'll listen to in the archives that don't have a segment from Austin Trunick. But pretty much everything since then, if it's a Cannon film, we've got Austin on. So here we go.
Cannon Chronicles with Austin Trunick.
Hello, Austin Trunick here, author of the Cannon Film Guide books. I've been asked to say a few words about Cyborg, which is probably the most Albert Pyun movie that Albert Pyun made at Cannon. Now, I've told the origin story of Cyborg before, but it's so good and so canon that it's worth sharing over and over again. So, this movie was not supposed to be Cyborg, at least not right off the bat. Cannon had plans to shoot 2 higher-profile movies down at the Dino De Laurentiis studios in the Carolinas. Those were going to be Masters of the Universe 2 and Cannon's much-delayed, much-celebrated, much-ballyhooed film version of Spider-Man. These movies were going to both be directed by Albert Pyun and were going to be shot back-to-back in a pretty wild manner. They were going to shoot the first half of Spider-Man, then take a break to shoot all of the second He-Man movie, and then bring everyone back just in time to shoot the second half of Spider-Man. Now, if you look around, you'll read varying stories about bounced checks or late licensing payments, but there's probably more truth to Cannon just not being able to afford 2 different movies of that scale at that point in the late 1980s. I would also venture to guess that the licensors probably didn't want their product showcased with films that looked cheaper than a regionally shot monster movie. So in any case, both Spider-Man and He-Man 2 were canceled, with pre-production was already underway, with Spider-Man sets being constructed and crates full of Masters of the Universe props and costumes on their way in the shipping containers to North Carolina. Now, obviously, Cannon were interested in recouping some of the money they'd sunk into those 2 movies, and fortunately, they had one of the most resourceful directors of all time working for them. Albert Pyun basically banged out a script for Cyborg in just a matter of days, and Cannon had JCVD on contract for another movie following Bloodsport, so things came together very quickly. Now, if you watch this movie carefully, you can spot elements from those 2 prior projects in Cyborg. For example, if you look at the chainmail that Fender Tremolo, the main bad guy, wears, that's the same piece of costume that the bad guy Blade was wearing in Masters of the Universe from 1987. Or when you watch the big rainy fight scene, you can see a half-built facade for the Daily Bugle in the background behind them. Now, I think there are 2 types of people in this world. people who are game for anything that Albert Pune puts down, and people who feel a need to know what the hell is happening when they're watching a movie. If you're in the former group, you're going to love this one. There's a crazy post-apocalyptic setting, special effects and costumes that look both brilliant and cheap at the same time, characters named after guitars for no discernible reason other than it's awesome. Plus, you get some extended fight scenes directed and choreographed by Van Damme himself, which just adds to the wildness, adds to the visual flair of this movie. If you are not someone who jibes with Albert Pune's low-budget, visionary, gung-ho, batshit style of making movies, I don't really know what to tell you. I feel like Cyborg is among his most approachable sci-fi films for the uninitiated. And for a rating, well, I have to give this one a 5. How can I not? For how quickly it was slapped together and how fun it is despite that, I owe it at least 5 stars. This is an Albert Pune classic, in my opinion. And with that, I am out, Spook Show listeners. I will catch you all next time.
Well, there you go. I think everything he's talking about with Albert Pune here, I think this dude almost deserves a Spook Show spotlight at some point. Maybe we even have like a special like Cannon spotlight. I don't know, something like that. We got to do something for the guy, right?
Yeah, he's going to show up on just about everything. Maybe not Grindhouse Gutter, but he's already on Cannon Fodder. He's more than likely going to show up in the Cult Corner. And I'm thinking of one particular movie. Yeah, that is Sword and the Sorcerer. Definitely needs to be on Cult Corner. But yeah, the Video Vortex. He's got quite a few that were not even more than quite a few that weren't theatrical, that were straight to video. So yeah, he'll show up on just about every episode of the Spook Show outside of Grindhouse Gutter.
Yeah,
I mean every series. Yeah.
As far as this movie is concerned, Cyborg, you heard Austin talk about some of its background there with its ties to Masters of the Universe and the failed Spider-Man movies from Cannon. That goes into some of the titles that I found for this. IMDb lists various different titles on there, and sometimes we find some pretty wacky ones. This one kind of is all over the board. It's also known as First Hero in the Philippines. The working title of the movie and a recut version and other versions you might see in other countries, it's known as Slinger. In the UK, an alternate title for this is Cyborg 009.
009, that's... now, what was that you said? The very first...
First Hero. That was in the Philippines.
I know where that came from, and only because I just read the tagline for this movie. He's the first hero of the 21st century, and he's our only hope.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where First Hero comes from.
So they just pulled from the tagline a title. Heat Seekers. That's the script title, which, whatever, right? Whatever. This thing's all over the place. Masters of the Universe 2, TV title. Masters of the Universe 2 Cyborg, another TV title. And
those weren't confusing titles at all,
Yeah. And, of course, the working title of Spider-Man. Now, you heard Austin explain the reasons for all that, but, yeah, that's crazy. And, of course, it was produced and distributed by the Cannon Group, and unfortunately, like we said, the last one of the key timeline of Cannon that we talked the most about, the Golan-Globus era. Surprise, surprise! This movie is rated R. Total runtime of 1 hour 26 minutes. It's listed on IMDb as an action sci-fi thriller, and it was filmed at like he mentioned, parts at least, the De Laurentiis Studios. EUE Screen Gem Studios there in Wilmington, North Carolina. Other parts of that area include Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, Castle Hayne, North Carolina, various parts of Tucson, Arizona, and even some out in California. So they were all over the country filming parts of this movie at various times around, give or take, starting in June of 1988. So I'm assuming that means probably throughout the summer of 1988 was when this was actually filmed. For best we can tell, a budget of $500,000. Now, some of that included the money that they had poured into Spider-Man and Masters of the Universe 2, right? But so I think, Smoak, you had seen something where like that probably totaled over $2 million or so that they had kind of put into that. Right?
Yeah, they had somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million or a little more on the pre-production stuff for Masters of the Universe and Spider-Man. So yeah, but the budget of this, as you said, was I guess $500,000, included in that was Jean-Claude Van Damme's pay, and I don't know what chunk of that was his, but yeah, that was the running total. I guess the actual total is $500,000, but
You would imagine that Van Damme had to have gotten a big chunk of that because, I mean, you know, he's kind of...
He was the biggest thing going for it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of at the beginning of his prime years here, right? Like, around here. Like,
he was basically going on blood. Actually, and they wanted Chuck Norris for this movie originally.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah, that would have been cool. That would have been awesome. But I guess, you know, Golan-Globus or whichever one or both recommended Van Damme based on the popularity of Bloodsport.
Yeah.
So, but he was a hot property at the time.
Yeah, not that they made a poor choice. It just would have been. It would have been awesomely different with Chuck Norris in it.
Yeah.
But still, regardless, I mean, for what you see here, and I will say I watched this on Amazon Prime, and I think you said you watched it on Tubi when we were talking earlier. I would imagine it's probably the same version of the movie that's out there streaming. This movie, as far as the look of it, still holds up pretty well. Like, that's a good copy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it looks good, you know?
It looks, it's fantastic. I mean, the whatever they used to strike, you know, I guess they had a very decent 35 millimeter print. To pull this from and remaster it or whatever, but it was definitely remastered in that version I saw on Tubi, which I assume is probably the same version you saw.
Yeah,
I assume probably on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, I would imagine so. But it looked really good, and I think considering what we're talking about here with the budget, like, you know, this remastered version, man, I mean, it really holds up.
The only thing I saw in there that might be, you know, a little iffy as far as the effects go is the matte work when they're entering Atlanta. The post-apocalyptic look of Atlanta. If they had just stayed with the post-apocalyptic look of Atlanta from the distance, it would have been better. But they incorporated the actors into the bottom lower half of the screen, and that's the only time that low budget, you know, shows, because it was really terrible matte work there.
Yeah,
they should have just with showing the distance, Atlanta in the distance as a POV from them, or whatever. But so that's really
it would have looked even better if you hadn't seen like the group of people walking across that bridge toward it, because you're looking at it like, you know, that looks bad, but it definitely had that. It definitely looked like something that Cannon put out in the '80s there for that stuff.
Definitely did. And mentioning that too, like you said, as we talked about off the initial top of the show, that this is, for all intents and purposes, this is the last Cannon film that was released when Cannon was Cannon, so to speak. It was the last theatrical movie of them together at the time, even though they kind of trailed on into the early '90s for a little while. And that's fitting, because when you think Cannon, you think '80s. Even though the company started earlier, but when, you know, Golan-Globus came into the picture, I believe it was either late '70s, early '80s, right? Somewhere in there.
Yeah, late '70s.
And
they took over early, like basically right at 1980.
Yeah, 1980. So 1980 to 1989, that is the prime Cannon years.
Yep.
And it's more than fitting that it's the entire decade of the '80s, because that's all you think of. Basically, when you think of Cannon, you think of the '80s, and they define '80s.
You know, for the most part, we're talking on Cannon Fodder here. We're talking about movies that Golan-Globus produced in, you know, from '80 to '89. But, you know, we're open to doing stuff that came out before and after that. But yeah, you're right. For a studio that started in 1967 and didn't really go away until 1994, I think. Its prime golden years are the '80s, '80 to '89. So that's right in the wheelhouse of what everybody knows and loves, even though they were there well before that and, frankly, well after that.
Yeah.
As far as box office is concerned, it went on to make a worldwide gross of $10.1 million, which is, you know, very respectable for a Cannon film, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
The weekend that it opened, this is the weekend of April 7th through the 9th of 1989. I've got the top 10. Number 10, Dangerous Liaisons. That was in its 16th week. Good Lord. It just feels like these days you don't hear of a movie playing that long anymore. You know, like sometimes we look at these and like, well, it's in its 32nd week. You're like, Jesus Christ, you know. 16 weeks at it. That sounds like a long run, especially for today's standards. Number 9, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was in its 8th week. Number 8, Lean on Me. Number 7, The Rescuers. That was the 1989 re-release. Number 6, in its opening week, Dead Calm. Number 5, in its 4th week, Fletch Lives.
Nice.
And opening up at number 4, Cyborg. It made $3.1 million in its opening week for Cannon. Pretty good way for them to go out.
Kind of sucks for them, you know, at the time. I mean, it's great for them, but kind of sucks that they go out on a movie that really made. I mean, they were good at making money off these movies, you know, making them for cheap and then get good profits from them. But they turned a good profit off of this one, but they had already
Yeah,
it already had gone south before this movie, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm sure Austin will go deep into whenever he finally releases Volume 3 of the Cannon Film Guide. I'm sure he'll go deep into the demise of Cannon Films, and we could have a whole discussion. That's probably a whole episode with Austin right there, just talking about the end of Cannon Films. And I'm sure we'll do that one day. But it is kind of a shame that like this one was successful, but the writing was already on the wall. It was pretty much already over, you know.
Yeah, they overreached, you know, long story short, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. Number 3 at the box office that week, Rain Man. It was in its 17th week, and two slightly bigger openings than Cyborg came out that week. Number 2, The Dream Team had opened up, and number 1, Major League, the baseball classic. Yeah, that was it was a pretty good weekend for movies there. Opening up Major League, The Dream Team, Cyborg, and Dead Calm all that weekend. So not bad. Not bad. Lots of good choices that weekend. So it's always cool to look back at the, you know, the old box office stuff. And of course, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, it was directed and written by Albert Pune. He's best known for The Sword and the Sorcerer, tons of other like random low budget type flicks like this, like Alien from LA, Journey to the Center of the Earth, you know, the one from 1988, right before Cyborg, honestly. A couple years after this, he did Captain America. Good Lord. That one from 1990.
Oh man, that like Austin Trunick said, it is Albert Pune. It's definitely an Albert Pune view of Marvel and of Captain America. It wasn't the first live action Captain America. That was 1979, and I don't remember exactly who directed that one, but damn, the Albert one was
he did
crazy.
He did a couple of the Kickboxer sequels: Kickboxer 2, The Road Back; Kickboxer 4, The Aggressor; Doll Man, Nemesis, Brain Smasher, A Love Story. That's a direct-to-video, I believe. Hong Kong 97, Heat Seeker. That's funny. He comes back around because wasn't one of the titles for this is Heat Seekers? He comes back around and makes a movie in 95 called Heat Seeker. The Nemesis movies: Nemesis, Nemesis 2, Nebula, Nemesis 3, Time Lapse, Nemesis 4, Death Angel. You get the point. We got lots of Crapster Piece, Video Vortex, Grindhouse Gutter, if you will. We got lots of stuff to go through with this dude's filmography. So I'm looking forward to that one day. Yeah,
we'll have to do a spotlight for sure, and then get to some more of his off the wall zany movies, as Austin Trunick mentioned.
Yeah. This movie, of course, stars Jean-Claude Van Damme as Gibson Rickenbacker. You know,
now, first of all, before we go any further than that, when I hear Rickenbacker, I think instead of Jean-Claude Van Damme, maybe they could have got Lemmy from Motorhead to play Rickenbacker role, because that. For those who don't know, Lemmy played Rickenbacker exclusively. That you know, that trademark bass of his was a Rickenbacker. Did you see Lemmy in the role of Jean-Claude Van Damme in this movie? I don't think so, but it would have been
but it would have been awesome. Yeah. Not quite as awesome as Chuck Norris, but it would have been awesome for different reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, once again, Jean-Claude Van Damme, we could go on all day with his accolades: Double Impact, Double Team, Kickboxer. Even that highly acclaimed like documentary that he made that was made about him, like, you know, JCVD. I mean, tons. Like, this dude is action in the late 80s and most of the 90s, right? He is the action star.
And one of my personal favorites, where I don't know if it was his intro movie or not, but he played a bad guy, which he usually doesn't do, or you didn't do after he became bigger. But No Retreat, No Surrender. We'll definitely have to get around to that on Cult Corner or something.
Tons of good stuff, and I would venture to say Van Damme might be an action spotlight episode or something, or maybe something we could do over on the YouTubes or something, you know, like some little other offshoot kind of thing, because he didn't do a lot of horrors or anything like that. So, you know, I don't know if it's necessarily deserved of a Spookshow spotlight, but one of the biggest action stars of the time period. No doubt about that. He's right there in the same breath with Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Bruce Willis, right? Then there's Van Damme and Chuck Norris and a handful of other guys, but he's right there, Steven Seagal, guys like that.
Yeah, he kind of came in about that time, right, as Seagal, maybe, because he was a little bit later in the 80s. Like, that No Retreat, No Surrender might have been 86 or so, but he wasn't a name by that time. It wasn't until Bloodsport, I guess, right, that did it.
Yeah, I think that was the one that kind of really, he took off from there.
He kind of picked up the mantle from the earlier guys who came in the 70s and were working throughout the 80s. Then he kind of picked up from there, sort of the way Steven Seagal did, too.
It also stars Deborah Richter as Natty Simmons. You know, she's the I guess, teenage, early 20s girl that's kind of following Gibson Rickenbacker. Going into what Austin was talking about with the guitar names, that's hilarious. And Fender and
What was Pearl? What was her last name? Pearl
Prophet.
Pearl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's I mean, like just going through the names. Now, I'm not even going to go through the actors. You've got Marshall Strat.
Stratocaster. There.
Yeah.
That's his full last name. Stratocaster.
Furman Vux, Brick Bardo. There's a lot of good ones here. I mean, you could keep going on. Vondo, Xylo, Roland Pick. Why? Why Albert Pune? Why?
Well, this kind of ties into the original cut that we haven't talked about that yet. But I mean, we're going through the actors still. But the original cut had a more rock score to it too. I mean, it was and I guess we'll go through the actors first. We'll get around to talking about that other cut later. But I mean, the names tying into rock and roll music instruments, generally considered to be rock and roll instruments. Guitars and bass play, drums, all these different names of the actors in the roles ties into the fact that it was supposed to have been originally it was going to be a rock opera, I think, but then the opera part got dropped out of it. Then the soundtrack was rock oriented, but we'll get to that later.
Deborah Richter, she would best be known really probably from this. I mean, she was in a handful of episodes of Hill Street Blues, but she was also in the movie Midnight Madness in 1980. We've got Vincent Klein as Fender Tremolo.
That's the other one else.
Yeah.
Fender Tremolo.
God almighty. He would best be known for Point Break, Gangland, Double Dragon, tons of stuff of that era, like the 90s, these type of movies. He was in a lot of them. He had a unique look, I'll say that.
Oh yeah.
And, of course, a few other names. Alex Daniels was Marshall Strat. Dale Haddon as Pearl Prophet. As far as, like, names you may even be there's not a lot of names here. I mean, Van Damme is the star of the movie, so he's really the only name. But that's about it as far as going through that. And, of course, this was produced by Golan-Globus and Menachem Golan. So there's that. So was there anything else you wanted to talk specifically about before we start diving into it?
I don't know. Should we go into that alternate cut now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wasn't even really aware that there was an alternate cut until we started looking around and stuff here. Like, that would be super interesting to see.
Yeah, I would. It does exist. Apparently, I didn't know there was, like you said, an alternate cut. Much less the fact that it actually was released. But yeah, apparently, it was a more violent version. It was more stylized. Originally, Albert Pune's idea was that opera elements would be in it. I guess rock opera or whatever. They weren't going to go for that at all. So, but they did let him shoot the cut that he wanted to, which was originally going to be black and white with a more rock oriented score with more violence. In fact, so much that the MPAA, when they submitted it to them, they got an X rating for the violence. But apparently this cut was screened for, as they do for, test audiences or whatever. Like 1 out of 100 people maybe liked the cut that Albert Pune, that they viewed, that original Albert Pune cut. And apparently it was just it was too maybe dark or whatever. It was a lot more darker than, say, a typical Cannon film would be, or a typical not that there was a typical Jean-Claude Van Damme movie at the time, but he had done a few. And Van Damme wasn't too pleased with the cut himself either. So, of course, they went back to the drawing board and took the movie away from Albert Pune at that point and basically gave it to Van Damme to cut the way he did sort of with Bloodsport. He cut the scenes together to make the fighting scenes more action-oriented and more plentiful, whereas the original cut maybe had more gore, more violence, more stylized type stuff, scenes like that, but it had less of the fighting scenes per se. So they gave it to Van Damme to cut, and he cut it the way that it exists now. And unfortunately, that started a trend for Albert Pune, because I think I was reading like 12 or 13 movies beyond this one. Each one of those got taken from him at some point in the process, and somebody else finished it or cut it together differently or whatever. So I don't know how much of what we're really seeing in some of these later Albert Pune movies was Albert Pune or the producers necessarily cutting the way they wanted to cut it. But at any rate, that cut out there does exist. Apparently, Albert Pune, he died here back in November 2022. But prior to that, I guess he was distributing that cut himself. And I know that it was released in Germany that cut, the Albert Pyun cut, was released in Germany under what was the title? That was
one of the
what was
a Slinger.
Slinger, yeah. I was trying to think of the plot device of slingers in the story, which isn't really, it's not really described much as what they are. So you kind of have to come up with it on your own. Like, oh, okay, that's what they do.
I think they're kind of just guides, right? Like basically, they kind of smuggle people from one place to another, kind of thing, I guess.
You kind of have to gather that from some dialogue a little bit here or there in the movie, but apparently in the Albert Pyun cut, there is a more explanation in the beginning of what they are and what they do, and they basically guide people through these danger-infested cities, because it's a post-apocalyptic world, and so to get them through, to protect them as bodyguards, basically to get them through a city to wherever their destination is that they're going. So they're basically glorified bodyguards, right? It is out there, and I do want to see it at some point. Maybe we'll find it and we'll all watch it at some point later on down the road and have it as some sort of a addendum to the Cannon Fodder or something.
Yeah. If we can get our hands on a copy of that, we're watching it, and we're going to do something about. We're going to do some YouTube, some podcast special, something. We'll do something with that if we can get our hands on it. I don't know how easily accessible it is, but they did end up making 2 sequels to this movie, although they have little to no relation to this movie other than just the fact that it's called Cyborg. There was Cyborg 2 in 1993, and that has Angelina Jolie in it. And then there is Cyborg 3, The Recycler, direct to video. So this sounds like Video Vortex time. That came out in 1995.
I think another one that Pyun did, right? Because I know we were talking about it off air, so to speak. And I remember him saying that he wanted to do a movie, but he died back in November 2022. But I'm pretty sure on his credits, there's something listed. Now, he did the Nemesis film.
Yeah.
But there was a movie listed as Nemesis, but it has Cyborg in the title. Oh, Cyborg Nemesis, The Dark Rift.
Okay. So
I don't know. We'll have to figure out.
As far as title's concerned, it's not a sequel. I'm not seeing it listed, but yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there might be some connection there since, he wrote and directed this one, but I'm just looking at Cyborg 3, The Recycler. It's got Malcolm McDowell in it. It looks, just the cover of this, it looks so bad. So bad. So yeah, we'll be getting to that. I got that to look forward to.
Time for refreshment. Refreshment. For your enjoyment, there's hot, fresh popcorn, tempting, delicious hot dogs, and so many kinds of ice cream. And, of course, sparkling, delicious, ice-cold Coca-Cola for everybody at the refreshment counter now.
For you, the listeners of the All-American Spook Show, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. So I just go over to Audible, and I type in Cyborg. And I got to say, it looks like a lot of romance novels pop up for some reason, including the series called the Cyborg Seduction series. I see at least book 5 of this. Oh, no, wait a minute. There's a book 7. So, yeah, that's... Why? There's a number of these titles on here, and some of these are like Audible exclusives, it looks like. There's also Cyborg Core, Publisher's Pack. What is this? Cyborg Core Book 1 and 2. By J.N. Chaney and Christopher Winder. Cyborg's Secret Baby. The Interstellar Brides Program, the Colony Series, Book 7. By Grace Goodwin. Who knew? Who knew that, like, the cyborg... There's a cyborg subculture of romance novels here. But if any of that floats your boat, and I'm sure if Will were here, he'd be pretty excited. Or Donnie, for that matter.
Probably all of them.
Yeah, true. He would probably, him or Donnie, either one would probably have far more information than we have for you about these series. But if any of that floats your boat, you can go over to audibletrial.com/spookshow. Again, that's audibletrial.com/spookshow for your free audio book. So like we always say, they give you a credit. You can take that credit, get a free book. You get to keep the book no matter what, whether you cancel or keep going. Helps us out. You get a free book. Win-win. Jumped over to IMDb, clicked on plot summaries, and here we go. We got a few. We've got the simple one-sentence one. A martial artist hunts a killer in a plague-infested urban dump of the future. Yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. That's all we have to say about it. Good night, folks. There's 3 more. I'm not going to read all these. I'm just going to read the longest one. This was submitted by Daniel Williamson. It's hilarious when you hear it. Gibson Rickenbacker is a hired fighter living in a plague-ravaged apocalyptic America where a plague has infested most of the United States and the rest of the world. In New York City, Gibson encounters a woman named Pearl Prophet. Pearl reveals to Gibson that she is a cyborg who is carrying vital information for a group of scientists in Atlanta who are working on a cure to the plague, and Pearl hires Gibson to escort her back to Atlanta. But Pearl is kidnapped by pirates, a murderous gang led by Fender Tremolo, who wants the cure for themselves, and they decide to take Pearl to Atlanta themselves. Gibson, joined by a young woman named Natty Simmons, goes in pursuit of Fender and his gang as Gibson sets out to rescue Pearl, stop Fender and his gang from reaching Atlanta, and defeat Fender, who slaughtered Gibson's family. You know, like, as I was watching it, and like right out the gates, and this was without me, like, really, I watched the movie and then we did the research and done everything that's led up to this point, right? So, without knowing all the background and knowing everything, my first note was, is it just me, or does this movie start off a bit like Masters of the Universe? I mean, it really does. And now that I know, what we know from, you know, Austin and everything else we've looked at, and now it makes perfect sense. But
well, boy, well, hell, if you tuned into the TV and were watching this under the title, one of the titles on television, like you mentioned earlier, was Masters of the Universe 2 Cyborg.
Yeah,
you would be severely disappointed if you went into thinking it was going to be tied to Masters of the Universe. Even more disappointed than you were in seeing Masters of the Universe by Cannon, if you were expecting it to be like the animated series or something like that.
I guess.
So, yeah.
I guess the real question is, though, as far as the Masters of the Universe stuff is concerned, are we more disappointed that we didn't get Masters of the Universe 2 that would have had some of these elements to it, or are we happy that we got what we got? I guess that's the real question.
I think we're happy that we got what we got, but I was saying if you were, let's say, a Cannon film, well, even if you were just a Masters of the Universe fan, maybe not so much a Jean-Claude Van Damme fan, and you tuned into it thinking it was going to be tied to that, then yeah, you would be severely disappointed. But
yeah,
I think most people would be not disappointed, be happy that it's a Van Damme movie rather than necessarily a sequel. No, I'm not shitting on Cannon's Masters of the Universe, because it is what it is. It is a fun movie. But, you did not get what you expected.
No.
If you were expecting it to be based strictly on Mattel's toy line, cartoon series, and all that stuff, you got the Cannon Films version of that.
Yeah, when we talked about that when we did that one on, the Cannon Fodder episode, and that, like, even when I was 7 or 8, I'm like, what the hell is this? Like.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I like it more now than I did back then.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that. Like, I'm kind of 50-50 on that, because, like, even though, and we talked about that in that episode too, even though it wasn't as what I expected, it was still cool to see He-Man and Skeletor and everything. So, like,
the action version, yeah.
I still loved it, as 7, 8, 9 years old, because it's like, well, yeah, it ain't perfect, but it's the only He-Man and Skeletor movie we're probably ever getting. So, it is what it is. Now, yeah, I appreciate it for what it is, but I think I enjoyed it even then, just because I know I wouldn't be getting another one. Yeah, especially after you watch it, like, yeah, they're not making another one of these. I love this movie, and this is a thing in the 80s and the 90s too, of the future being bleak as fuck. Like, it goes to shit real quick. And almost every 80s post-apocalyptic movie, like, I don't know if they ever said how far in the future this was. I think it just says in the future.
Yeah, exactly. It says exactly that. Yeah. Whenever Fender is doing his monologue about loving the way the world is now, basically the violent shithole that it is. It's set in the future. Yeah.
And it's so nondescript. It's like, what happened? The plague. And I love that it's not only just the 80s vision of the future, right? But the technology doesn't make sense. Like, especially knowing what we know now. I'll give you that 30 years later, right? We know iPhones and internet, blah, blah, blah. But, like, those things weren't around. But, like, I love that, like, the cities are run down and just beat all to hell and, like, war torn and everything. But there's still, like, a TV electronics repair place on the like it's like 80s technology, but just throw some junk around to make it look like the future.
It's the Cannon way.
Yeah. And speaking of that technology gap, right? So let me get this straight. The whole premise of the movie is they made a woman a cyborg just to transport information.
Oh, well, first of all, let's start with that. Anyway, Cyborg, whenever I first saw this movie, I remember thinking, oh, cool, Van Damme's going to be a cyborg. He's going to be like a Terminator or something,
Yeah, no.
Before that's what I thought, though, when I was going into it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Van Damme as a cyborg or something.
I remember this movie used to play all the time on, like, Saturday matinees, like, you just watched Weekend at Bernie's. Coming up next, Jean-Claude Van Damme stars in Cyborg, and then you watch some edited version of it or something. But that and, between, I'm sure it was on HBO and Cinemax and stuff like that back in the day. But, like, that's how I watched it back then. So, yeah, I remember even back then seeing, like, oh, Cyborg, Van Damme, holy shit. Like you said, like, this is going to be awesome. It's Terminator. No.
Yeah, and it's still badass. As when you watched it, once you get over that initial, like, okay, I guess he's not going to be a cyborg.
Yeah.
The cyborg is this woman who's barely there. She's kind of like the plot element that drives the movie along, but she's not really that tied to it.
Yeah, she's barely in it, really. Some key scenes at the beginning. She pops up again in the middle, and then there she is at the end. That's pretty much it. But I just mean, the technology gap of this, like so in this post-apocalyptic, plague-riddled world, they can turn a woman into a cyborg. They can turn a person into a robot, half man, half robot thing, right? Like RoboCop. They can do this, but they can't just transfer files from one place to another. There's a logic gap there, Mr. Pune.
Yeah, you got to crawl before you can walk. I mean, hell, they just like totally, bypass the whole, forget this, whether we can go from gigs to whatever the next thing up from that was.
Terabytes. Terabytes, yeah.
Yeah, we're just going straight to like cyborgs.
Yeah.
Like they'll be able to carry what we need.
They just go from, in this, it's like the technology leap is like 18-inch color TVs to cyborgs.
Yeah.
Forget everything in between. We don't need it. It's trying to, like, the whole point of the movie, right? I should say there is a sub point to the movie, and we'll get to that. But, like, as far as, like, getting the cyborg part of it, right? Getting her from wherever the hell she's at to Atlanta. Don't they show a scene? There's a flashback scene of, like, them turning her, like, you're going to sacrifice yourself to become a cyborg, right? So they made her a cyborg in Atlanta? Is that what I gather? And then she went somewhere else, got whatever information she needed, and then now she needs to go back to Atlanta? Is that what's happening?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. There's some gap there, too. Why what was her other mission? Maybe there's a prequel there, what her mission was.
I don't know if I want to see that.
I'm sure Albert had it in the works or something.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he had a whole thing planned out. Yeah, I don't know. Like that was where it was like, what the hell is going on here? With the cyborg thing. The other thread of the movie is Van Damme Gibson Rickenbacker. He is a slinger, and like we said earlier, apparently you only come to the conclusion that a slinger is like these guys, and I guess women too, that kind of escort people from one place or another, or they're good at getting in and out of, these places, or they can traverse the wastelands of America in this situation, right?
And trying in one piece to the other side of where it is you need to be going, protecting you from pirates.
Yeah.
Whatever.
The shit that is happening in this scenario. So like he meets up with the way I gather it is he is hired, I guess, by this woman that has a couple of kids that need to they need to be safe, whatever the hell they hired him for. And they find a farm and then, or, an old house or something. And then they just play family, right? They just become a family. Yeah. I didn't feel like it was his family to begin with. I feel like he was hired and then all of a sudden, right?
Like he didn't have, those kids weren't his, right? None of them. Yeah. They all were, they're hers, right? I guess. Yeah. I mean, that's what, kind of hard to get. I know maybe there's more to that in Albert Pune's original Slinger cut of it.
Must be.
I don't know. Maybe, but I mean, yeah, it's very confusing. It's just slapped together of like,
yeah, basically like he's hired to escort them, and all of a sudden, like, well, we found this house, let's set up roots, and then he kind of takes them on as his family, and then all of a sudden, Fender and his gang, the pirates, they show up, and what you see later in the movie is they torture them and kill the mom and the was it a little boy, I think, right? Yeah, the other kid, yeah. By one of the most fucked up means necessary, by the way. He basically like strings Gibson and the woman and the boy up with rope and barbed wire or something, like ties them up, then holds them over a well. Meanwhile, makes the, what would you say, roughly 15-year-old girl, whatever age she is, the Haley, the girl, makes her hold them up by barbed wire. Like, if you can hold them, they're going to live. So, of course, what do you think, right? So they show this, and what I'm describing here plays out in like 8 different flashbacks throughout the entire movie. When they finally show the part, though, where it happens and you see them fall down the well, somehow Gibson is perfectly fine. But they fell, and died. So did he? What? Did he fall on top of them? Look around like, oh shit, I made it out of there. Oh damn, they're dead. Well, I'm gonna climb out of the well.
Either way, that's pretty dark for Cannon, right? I mean,
absolutely.
In fact, again, the original movie was even darker, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty dark stuff for Cannon. Like, here's your family. The only way they're gonna live is if you can hold on to this barbed wire as they're being lowered down into the well with it.
Yeah, good Lord. And of course, that the culmination of all that is that Haley basically gets taken by Fender, and this is sometime later from the flashback. What would you say, roughly 10 years? I guess you kind of put it together. 5 to 10 years later, or whatever. That this this whole cyborg thing plays out with Van Damme's character, and Haley is still with Fender, and she's like on his side, or at least you feel like she's on his side until a little bit later on, but toward the end. But yeah, that was the big reveal, is that like, oh wait a minute, that's that girl that was holding her family with the barbed wire. Mostly, the movie is basically them going from one place to another. He's helping out Pearl Prophet, the cyborg. But then eventually, like, the gang comes along, beats the shit out of Van Damme, and just takes her. Meanwhile, she's like pretty much willing to go with them. Like, yeah, like, well, they're more powerful and can take care of me anyway, so they'll get me to Atlanta, and then we'll take care of them. So she just fuck you, Gibson. I'll get them to take me. But he meets up with Natty, and she wants to help, so they continue on the path of helping them get to Atlanta. Kind of just in the background, really. Like, they have various fights with the gang, take a few of them out, right? But meanwhile, Fender's gang is still making its way to Atlanta. Now, his motivation in getting her to Atlanta is if he can basically get the cure for the plague, then he rules the world, right? Because everybody would owe him, like, well, if you want to be cured of the plague, kiss the throne, right? That's his motivation. Meanwhile, they're trying to just get her there so the world can be a better place, kind of thing. But along the way, there's lots of knife sharpening. That should have been one of the alternate titles of this movie. Knife Sharpener the movie. Did you notice it? There's a lot of knife sharpening.
Yeah, anytime you have an awkward scene of like where there's no dialogue or anything, just pull out the knife and start sharpening it. Or if you need to pad the running time or something.
Yeah, there's literally even one scene where there's about 5 or 6 shirtless dudes, just, buff, post-apocalyptic dudes with no shirts, sitting around sharpening knives. And it just pans from left to right, like slowly, like, well, that's all they're doing. And multiple scenes of Van Damme sharpening his knife, it's just a lot of it going on here. They missed out on an alternate title on that one. How about when he knocked? How about when he knocked the dude out with a basketball? he just grabs the basketball and he didn't really like throw it or anything. He just kind of boom, and they just knocks the dude clean.
Ball, hit him in the face with the ball.
Knocks the dude clean out.
I've gotten, back in the day as a teenager or whatever, I got hit in the face with a basketball, not by somebody with their hands, but just, boom, it's thrown or whatever, right?
It's painful.
And it gives you a little, but, you don't get knocked. And I was a teenager.
Yeah, so. I didn't get knocked out, but I got squared up in the nose. That didn't feel good, but I still didn't get knocked out.
You see a little stars, a little white, flash or whatever.
No, this dude, he didn't even do it with full force. He just kind of like pushes it forward, and then the dude just,
No, if that's all it took, that kid could have done that, probably knocked him out.
Yeah, no shit. There's one scene where Gibson and Natty go swimming, and they come out of the water and they're still filthy. Everybody's filthy as hell in this movie. You notice that? Like, they're always covered in dirt, grime, blood, sweat.
What about Fender's glasses? I don't even know how he could see. His entire sunglasses were crusted with whatever it was. city dust. I don't know.
Yeah, and that is part of his unique look, right? Now, I guess my question is, I haven't seen enough of the guy in other movies to know, are his eyes really like that, or did they have some kind of contact thing going on with him?
Yeah, I don't know that. I haven't dug into him to see if I've seen him in other movies. I don't recall him in too many other movies, but I know he's been in some other ones that I would say that was it just kind of looked like contact lenses, just because the way they were so like bright.
Yeah, you would think, but I don't know. That's why I asked. But it definitely helps the unique look and why. One of the reasons I think you would remember this movie years later is, like, of course, Van Damme, of course, the whole post-apocalyptic theme of it and everything, but also this dude's look. He has a very unique look in this movie. And he's a good villain in this movie, so I think it holds up in that regard as far as, like, these are one of the things you remember about it.
And as Austin Trunick mentioned, he's wearing the costuming from Blade, I think it was right, in Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, and now that he said that, like, you can't unsee that. He is, straight up. How about Van Damme's usual split that he used to do in every movie? Yeah,
I was waiting for it back the first time I saw this movie, and I was waiting for, is he going to do a split? Because I saw this movie, I think, after I'd already seen Kickboxer, too. I didn't see it exactly right when it came out. I don't remember exactly what the time period was, but I know I'd probably seen a few Van Damme movies before that. Like, is he going to do a split anywhere?
Yeah.
And then there it was. It pops up in the scene where he's between the two walls or whatever, and then he stabs the guy, right?
I think he stabs the dude in the head. You don't see it happen. Like, you just see him, he's doing the split, he's over the guy, and then he comes down with the knife. So I think he stabbed the dude in the head, but you didn't see it.
That would have been awesome to see if it was shot with the actual finishing, move or whatever you want to call it. Because, the movie did, like I said, get an X rating from the MPAA originally, and they had cut it down to an R. So I just wonder if that's one of the ones that was cut or not.
So they finally get to Atlanta, and that, like you said, that match shot where you see Atlanta and everything, and there's a thunderstorm. Atlanta is straight up a hellscape. I love that. Not only did they set up the fact that, like, this is just a hellish landscape that is Atlanta, but for some reason this is where, quote unquote, the rebellion lives. Like the headquarters of good is in Atlanta, which looks like, the gates of hell.
There's some kind of running thing with it. I don't know how many movies have used that, but I know for sure this and Walking Dead, right? Because they were getting to Atlanta and Walking Dead for a reason that they thought that something was going to be there that they needed to.
And that was because of the CDC, right? Like, I think isn't the not CDC, but something like that, right? Maybe it is the CDC. One of them's like there's a headquarters in Atlanta.
For Disease Control.
Yeah. There's one. It's like it's headquartered in Atlanta, or there's a big part of it in Atlanta, or something. So maybe that's why that kind of theme keeps coming up. I don't know, but yeah, really that's pretty much it. I mean, there's some other key scenes like where Fender and his gang just beat the living fuck out of Gibson, and then they kind of crucify him, right? Like,
yeah.
They don't really, but they kind of do.
Yeah, it's like it's a ship mast, right? Of a boat, whatever's been pulled up on shore, or whatever, and crucify him on the mast of it.
They just like
with crossbow bolt.
Yeah, I was about to say they like stick some arrows through his hands, but then his wrists are still tied, so he's just kind of really. I mean, other than just that final fight with Fender, that's pretty much it. Like there's a obvious like 10 to 15 minute long final battle with Fender out in the rain. Which is an epic big 80s type of this type of movie fight. It's a big epic fight. Of course, Gibson wins. They deliver Pearl to whatever they're delivering her to get the information, and him and I should say that Natty dies in that final battle with Fender. Right? She takes a shot or something, right? And I forget. I think she
he's in that car after he got thrown through the car windshield, the burned out car or whatever it was, sitting there, and then there's that whole scene where he does something to her, right? While Van Damme's in the
he either stabbed her or shot. I don't remember exactly what happened, but like basically she dies, and that's kind of the big moment. Like she sacrificed herself, for the cause, whatever how you want to phrase it. And then, but Haley, the girl that the barbed wire girl, she turns on Fender and helps Gibson defeat him, and then they turn Pearl over to the the proper people. And then they're just like, well, you going to join up with the rebellion? No, there's others out there that need us. And then they just walk away. The end.
Yeah.
So I guess they were setting up for the sequels, although the sequels had little to do with any of this, but it would have, I guess it would have been slightly interesting to see where Albert Pune would have went with it if he was, you know, the ones calling the shot on that end. But I guess the lineage of that probably in a lot of ways pretty much died with Golan-Globus's Cannon, right? You know, I would imagine, you know, they were trying to set something up there, and then it just, well, that was it.
Yep.
So there you go. That's Cyborg. So I have Donnie's rating. I'll save, but I don't have Will's. He didn't send me that. But I do have Donnie's Cannonball rating. But I guess I'll go first since this was my nominee. And, you know, that's usually the way we play it. So I think as far as Cannon movies are concerned, there are far better, but there are far worse. Van Damme is really good in this flick. You know, I think overall, it holds up pretty well. There's some scenes that look a little cheap ass, but, you know, 1989. But I think there's plenty to enjoy here if you like those post-apocalyptic action movies that there were a lot of in the late 80s and early 90s. This is probably one of the better ones. A couple good performances, you know, or at least for this type of movie, right? You're not comparing it to anything that would be worthy of an Oscar, but for these type of movies, a couple pretty good performances. So you got the right amount of action and nudity and everything. So thumbs up. I'll give it 4 cannonballs on my scale. And like we said, you know, Austin gave it 5 earlier. I could definitely see going there. You know, I'm not going to shit on that.
Yeah, I agree with like you're saying is as far as this being in the Cannon catalog and in our sliding Cannon scale, there are much better and there are much worse. You know, there are definitely much worse.
Yes,
but yeah, there are better. Also, as you said, post-apocalyptic thing that was a huge thing in the 80s. I mean, hell, it started. You could go back to some movies in the 70s, and then even today, it's still going. The post-apocalyptic subgenre, and for me personally, it's a personal favorite of mine. Whether they're American made, Australian made, and by Australian, I'm thinking of like Mad Max and Road Warrior and whatnot, or Italian made. The Italians put out a shit ton, as we've done at least one so far, which was 1990, The Bronx Warriors. So yeah, I'm a sucker for post-apocalyptic movies, especially in the 80s when Jean-Claude Van Damme's his fighting skills and all that's great. His acting skills are what they are, you know.
Yeah.
No, he's an action star and whatever. It's much like Dolph Lundgren, you know.
It's minimal dialogue.
Yeah, it's minimal dialogue. Who cares? You're there for the cinematography. I mean, not cinematography, for the
action. You're there for the action.
The other word, choreography, the fight choreography.
Yeah, exactly.
And his scenes and, you know, doing what he does and whatnot. So, and you get plenty of that. And again, if you're a fan of the post-apocalyptic theme, then you got that too, and that's a bonus. So I pretty much echo yours. I'm going to go with the 4 cannonballs on it. As I said, I can see where Austin, again, like you said, went with 5 for a cannonball, you know, sliding scale of cannonball rating. But yeah, I'll go with 4 as well.
Donnie, I don't know what his thoughts were on it, but he gave me a cannonball rating of 3, and I don't have Will's rating. So, all right, so Donnie's not with us, like we said, but he did leave us his Cannon connections.
Cannon Connections.
So as always, he does a good job of finding these connections, and he found a few good ones here. Of course, the biggest one here is Jean-Claude Van Damme, but I was thinking this was the first Van Damme movie we had done, but no. Donnie found the one, and I forgot about this. He was a soldier in Missing in Action. Remember, it was a very small part. Probably wouldn't even know that he was in it kind of thing, but not only have we done a movie with Van Damme in it, I should say, but this isn't even the first Cannon one. He was, you know, with Missing in Action. So there's that.
Also, well, we move on further from there. I'm pretty sure that maybe it was Will who you know, we put the Cannon movies on a wheel, right? I think that's how we do it.
Wheel spin,
a wheel. I think Will's wasn't his breaking.
Yes, it was. Yep.
Sure. And if that had won, that would have been another connection because Van Damme is in there as as one of the beach break dancers.
Yeah, so there you go. That would have been another good one. But as far as the crew connections, he's got the FX person Thomas Flouts. He connects to Critters, Malignant, Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, and Hellraiser Bloodline. So four connections from Thomas Flouts, and that's pretty interesting ones too. That's all over the board, even all the way up to Malignant, for God's sake. So yeah, there we go. Always cool to see that stuff. And since this is Cannon Fodder, we don't do gore score, we don't do kill count and everything. So I guess that's pretty much where we'll leave it. As far as the critic the critic aggregates and everything for this one. IMDb, it got 5 out of 10 stars. Metascore on Metacritic, that goes up to 100. It got 24. So not good. And Rotten Tomatoes wasn't very friendly either. Tomato meter, 22%. And the audience score is a little higher, but only 31%. So, yeah, I think audiences and critics are kind of meh. It is what it is. But I think there is some, if you like that type of movie and you like the, the Cannon films like we do, I think there's a lot of enjoyment to be had here with this one. So I think as the Spook Show gang all together, we recommend it. And, of course, maybe at some point we'll get Donnie's actual thoughts on it. And, of course, we need to get Will's Cannonball rating and everything. And I'm sure this will come back up. It will come back up on our 5th anniversary and, the Spook Show Awards and everything else. So I guess we'll leave it there for now. But coming up next week, we're going back to the Hellraiser series. I guess I have no one to blame but myself here for this one. But it's my choice this time, and I've got to pick a newer one. So I'm like, you know what? We need to get through this Hellraiser series so we can move on to some other stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my nomination now and go ahead and go with Hellraiser Hellseeker. That's Hellraiser 6. So that's what we're going to be watching and talking about next Monday. So, but before then, though, don't forget this Friday on Patreon, Troll 2. So you want to be a member over on patreon.com/AASpookshow and go to AASpookshow.com for links and everything else. So you want to be around for this Friday for Troll 2 because I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that as much as you can look forward to anything on Crafts Piece Theater. I'll say that. So,
true. I'm looking forward to it so much that like I said at the beginning, I think of this show or whichever show it was my choice, so I don't even have to be there for that episode, but I probably will.
Yeah. So
because it's Troll 2.
So there you go. Yeah. So for Donnie and Will, who couldn't be with us, Professor Smoak, I'm Josh. We are from the All-American Spook Show, and we'll talk to you next week.
As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.